October 2025. Centre Road, Clayton South, Melbourne. Bulldozers arrive. 41 years of Australian car manufacturing. Volkswagen Beetles from 1954. Datsun 120Ys from 1977. Nissan Bluebirds through the 80s. Skylines and Pintaras into 92, flattened for a data centre. 2,600 Melbourne workers built cars on that site. 1,800 of them lost their jobs on the 4th of February, 1992, the day the Yokohama boardroom voted to close the plant. 20,231 cars in the final year. Down from 58,000 2 years earlier. Datsun Clayton was the first Australian car factory to fall. Mitsubishi, 2008. Ford 2016, Holden 2017, Toyota 2017. The Bulldozers in October 2025 were the last chapter. How does the same company that supplied the Japanese military against Australia in the Pacific War end up closing an Australian family car factory 47 years later? Before we go any further, if you want to keep these stories alive, I've created a book with the complete Australian lost factories. The workers, the gates, the Australian made, all gone. The link is on the first line of the description. Back to the story. Chapter 1, Centre Road, October 2025, Clayton South, Victoria. A modest industrial road on the southeastern edge of Melbourne. Bosch has an office at 1555 Centre Road. Bosch engineer Paul Gekas looks out the window and sees the excavators arrive at the site opposite. He films it. Bulldozers moving in on the old Volkswagen Nissan Volvo factory. Concrete slabs being broken. Steel structural beams coming down. Overhead cranes, rusted from years of disuse, being torn out. Same site, same fate as the neighbouring former Holden Special Vehicles headquarters, demolished the same year for the same reason. Both cleared for state-of-the-art data centres. Server racks and cooling towers where Australian family cars used to roll off the line. The Centre Road site is 365,000 square metres. In its manufacturing years, it produced Volkswagen Beetles under a 1954 licensing arrangement, Datsuns from 1977 under Nissan Motor Manufacturing Company Australia, and Volvos before that. 41 years of Australian car manufacturing. Then, in 1992, Nissan's Yokohama boardroom pulled the plug. 20,231 cars in the final year, down from 58,000 in 1990. 1,800 workers redundant from a 2,600-person workforce. The plant sat as commercial warehousing through the 2000s and 2010s, owned by Goodman Group, rented to logistics companies. But the manufacturing was gone. Then, October 2025. The Bulldozers arrived, same corporate name, Nissan, that supplied the Japanese military machine that fought Australian and Allied forces in the Pacific War, 1942 through 1945. Same company, different war, 47 years apart. This is the story of how a 6-decade corporate lineage from Yoshisuke Aikawa's 1933 Nissan Zaibatsu to Yutaka Kume's 1992 Tokyo boardroom, built and then walked away from the Australian family car factory at Clayton South. Chapter 2, Martin and King, 1951, Post-war Australia, long service leave, secure jobs, home ownership, the FX Holden, 3 years into production. Australia is starting to holiday by tow bar and commute by 4-cylinder sedan. Australian railway coach builder Martin and King, based in Melbourne, sees the opportunity. Assembly plants for imported cars. The government requires local content. Foreign manufacturers need Australian factories. Martin and King builds a car assembly plant on Centre Road, Clayton South, In 1951, initial plan, assemble Jowett Javelin cars from Britain under a completely knocked-down licence. Jowett collapses 1953. The plant needs a new tenant. Volkswagen steps in, June 1954. Volkswagen begins assembling Beetles at Clayton using completely knocked-down kits shipped from Wolfsburg. By the early 1960s, the Australian government has pushed local content requirements to 85% for Volkswagen. By some accounts, Australian Volkswagen local content peaks at 95%, nearly a fully Australian-made Beetle. 1960. The plant is enlarged. 1968. Volkswagen sets up a subsidiary called Motor Producers Limited to run the Clayton operation. Motor Producers Limited diversifies. Alongside Beetles, it starts assembling Datsuns for Nissan Motor Company Australia, which has been importing Datsuns to Australia since the 1960s, initially through industrialist Sir Lawrence Hartnett's distribution network. By 1972, Motor Producers Limited is assembling Datsuns and Volvos alongside Volkswagens on the same Clayton line. Then, 1976. Nissan Motor Company Limited, Yokohama, Japan, buys Motor Producers Limited outright. Volkswagen assembly ends March 1977. The Centre Road plant becomes Nissan Australian Manufacturing. First locally assembled Datsun 200B rolls off the line in January 1978. Nissan Clayton is born, not as a new build, as the acquisition of an existing Australian car factory. 41 years of Melbourne car manufacturing heritage rebadged to a Japanese parent company. Context matters. Nissan had been importing Datsuns to Australia since the 1930s. Sydney's Pressed Metal Corporation had been assembling Datsun Bluebirds since 1966, up to 20,000 units a year. Nissan Motor Company Australia Proprietary Limited had been formally established in 1966. But the Clayton acquisition in 1976 was the moment Nissan Australia went from being an importer with some assembly work to being a real Australian car manufacturer at scale. The Australian government's push toward 85% local content had made the transition inevitable. Nissan Japan had to build cars in Australia or exit the market. Yokohama chose to build. For 15 years. Chapter 3. The 200B. October 1977. Datsun 200B launches in Australia, initially fully imported from Japan. Then, January 1978, local Clayton assembly begins. To meet Australia's 85% local content rule, the Clayton engineering team modifies the Japanese design. The Japanese market 200B has independent rear suspension. The Australian version uses a live rear axle with coil springs, cheaper, tougher, easier to make from Australian-sourced components. 2-litre L20B engine, 70 to 72 kilowatts, 4-speed manual or 3-speed automatic. Sedan first, wagon second, GL and GX trim levels. Then, June 1978, the sporty SX arrives, priced competitively against the Holden Tirana and Ford Cortina. The 200B became Australia's best-selling 4-cylinder car. Tough, cheap to run, durable. Family buyers loved it. Grey import mechanics in every Australian suburb learned the L20B engine intimately. By 1979, 200Bs were on suburban driveways across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. Then, 1980. The Mitsubishi Sigma, built at Tonsley Park, Adelaide, by Chrysler Australia before its Mitsubishi takeover, captures 28% of the Australian 4-cylinder market to the 200B's 16%. The 200B's market lead slips, but by that point, Nissan Australia is planning the successor. Meanwhile, the Datsun 120Y. Launched in Australia, May 1973. Not built at Clayton, but imported from Japan and sold through Nissan Australia's dealer network. A12 1200 cubic centimetre engine, 68.4 horsepower, 793 kilograms. Marketed as frugal to run and fun to drive. Fuel economy of 49 miles per gallon in 1973, when the first oil shock hit Australian petrol prices. By December 1976, 27% of new passenger cars sold in Australia were small economical cars. The 120Y was second in the small car segment only to the Holden Gemini. Datsun branded cars, the imported 120Y and the Clayton-built 200B dominated Australian family motoring in the late 1970s. Nissan Australia was by 1978 a real Australian car manufacturer with a real Australian dealer network, and the Clayton plant was humming. Chapter 4. Yokohama and Manchuria. Rewind. 1933. Yokohama, Japan. Yoshisuke Aikawa. Born the 6th of November 1880 in Yamaguchi Prefecture, related to Meiji-era Genro Inoue Kaoru. Graduated Tokyo Imperial University in Engineering, 1903. Worked at Shibara, a forerunner of Toshiba, then studied cast iron manufacturing in the United States. Founded Tabata Foundry, 1910. In 1928, Aikawa created the holding company Nihon Sangyo, Nissan. After the 1931 Manchurian incident, the Japanese invasion of northeast China, Aikawa built the Nissan Zaibatsu. 132 companies: Nissan Motors, Isuzu, Hitachi, NEC, the Nissan concern, Imperial Japan's most prominent new Zaibatsu, a fresh industrial combine standing alongside the older Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo and Yasuda dynasties, 1933. Aikawa founds Jidosha Seizokol, renamed Nissan Motor Company Limited, 1934. The Yokohama plant completes 1935. Then 1937. Japan invades China. The Second Sino-Japanese War begins, and Aikawa moves Nissan's headquarters to Hasinking, Manchukuo, the Japanese puppet state in occupied northeast China. Invited by Nobis Tsukikishi, future Japanese Prime Minister, grandfather of Shinzo Abe, Aikawa becomes chairman of the Manchurian Industrial Development Company. The MIDC. The Zaibatsu of the puppet state. Aikawa is one of the Nikisansuke, the 5 industrial political power brokers of Manchukuo. Executes 2 5-year industrial plans for the Kwantung Army, the Japanese occupation force. Nissan trucks, staff cars, engines and war material supply the Imperial Japanese Army through the late 1930s. Then December 1941. Pearl Harbor. The Pacific War begins. Nissan trucks, including the Datsun 17T, built 1938 to 1944, supply the Imperial Japanese Army throughout the Pacific War against Australian and Allied forces, from January 1942 through August 1945. Critical precision. Nakajima Aircraft, a separate Japanese company, built the Zeros and other Japanese military aircraft. Nissan built ground vehicles and engines. Different companies, different roles, but the same Imperial Japanese war machine. Nissan's Yoshiwara plant completes October 1943. Car and truck production completely stopped in December 1943 as the war intensifies and Japanese industry consolidates for total war. In August 1945, Japan surrenders. Aikawa is arrested by United States occupation authorities. Class A war crime suspect. The Nissan Zaibatsu is dissolved. Aikawa is later released, never charged, and elected to the Japanese House of Councillors in 1953. He dies the 13th of February 1967, 86 years old. For balance, historians note Aikawa was not a pure ultranationalist. Louise Young, in Japan's Total Empire, notes that Aikawa opposed the tripartite pact between Japan, Germany and Italy, and predicted that Britain and France would prevail over Nazi Germany. He supported Jewish refuge in Manchukuo, believing their business skills could help build the puppet state economy. He resigned from the MIDC chairmanship in 1942 under pressure from the Kwantung Army, which was suspicious of his industrial independence. But the corporate lineage is what matters here. The Nissan Motor Company that operated at Clayton from 1976 through 1992 was the direct corporate descendant of Aikawa's Nissan Motor Company Limited, same name, same corporate identity, same founding date of 1933. The American occupation dissolved the Zaibatsu holding structure. It did not erase the operating company, same corporate name. Nissan would later, 32 years after Aikawa's death, close the Australian family car factory at Clayton. Chapter 5. Bluebird, 1981. Clayton production line. The Datsun 200B ends production. Its successor arrives. The Nissan Bluebird 910 launches at Clayton in 1981. Badged Datsun initially, becoming Nissan when the Australian rebrand happens in 1983. Marketing slogan, verbatim, the first four-cylinder limousine. 2-litre L20B engine. Later CA20S, Australian market spec, no independent rear suspension, no electronic fuel injection, no factory turbo. Downspec'd from the Japanese market version to fit the Clayton line and meet local content rules. Sedan and wagon. Then 1982. The TRX flagship, front air dam, centre mount aerial. 15-inch alloy wheels, rear spoiler, bolstered seats, rear disc brakes. Nissan Australia National Sales Manager Noah Watson sends 6 early TRXs to the Nissan racing team. The TRX wins the 1982 Australian Endurance Championship for makes. George Fury takes pole position for the 1984 Hardy 1000 at Bathurst in a Bluebird turbo. 2 minutes, 13.850 seconds. A Clayton-built 4-cylinder sedan outqualifying the Ford Falcons and Holden Commodores at the biggest race in the country. 130,000 Bluebird 910s built at Clayton between 1981 and 1986. Read that again, 130,000. From one assembly line, on Centre Road, Clayton South, over 5 years. The Australian family car of the early 1980s. Behind every 5th Holden Kingswood and Ford Falcon in a Melbourne car park, there was a Bluebird 910. In every regional Queensland town, in every South Australian country, pub car park, on every Nullarbor Roadhouse crossing. Bluebirds, silver, champagne, metallic blue, the Datsun then Nissan badge on the boot. 1983, Nissan Australia formally drops the Datsun name. All future cars sold as Nissan. The rebrand had been in progress globally since about 1981. Datsun becomes Nissan. Same company. New badge. Australian dealers repaint their showroom signs. Clayton workers get new uniforms. Peak Clayton employment approaches 2,600 workers. Fitters, painters, line workers, quality control engineers, foremen, tool and die makers, second-generation Vietnamese Australians and post-war European migrants. Springvale Road, industrial corridor commuters. Members of the Vehicle Builders Employees. Federation of Australia, the VBEF, founded 1863, dissolved 1993, with Victorian Secretary Ian Jones representing the shop floor. Peak production approaches 58,000 vehicles per year. Nissan Australia is a real Australian manufacturer. Clayton is a real Australian factory. Chapter 6. Peak, 1986. 2 new models arrive at Clayton. The Nissan R31 Skyline, Wheels Magazine Car of the Year, 1986. RB30 3-litre straight-six engine, the same engine block used in the Holden VL Commodore. Nissan supplied to General Motors Holden under a component-sharing arrangement. 153 horsepower in base trim, 187 in the Silhouette flagship, independent rear suspension. Australian-tuned suspension calibration. Same year, the Nissan Pintara, a nameplate unique to Australia. R31 Pintara from 1986, four-cylinder CA20E engine, sedan and wagon, GLE, executive, GX and GXE trims. Intended to rival the Mitsubishi Magna, intended to be Nissan Australia's answer to the family-sized Japanese sedan segment. 2 cars off one Clayton assembly line. R31 Skylines for the enthusiasts. Pintaras for the family market, plus continuing 120RY and Pulsar variants, plus continuing Bluebird 910 production through 1986. Ivan Devison. A.O., born 18th of February 1934. 30 years of General Motors Holden's experience behind him. Becomes Managing Director of Nissan Motor Company Australia in 1987. The Melbourne executive brought in to lead Clayton into the 1990s. Nissan Australia invests 174 million Australian dollars in the Clayton operation in the year before closure alone. A major upgrade for the new N14 Pulsar production line, with some sources citing the total upgrade program at $362 million across multiple years. Nissan Australia looks committed. Devison looks committed. Clayton looks committed. 2,600 Melbourne workers building nearly 58,000 cars a year. R31 Skylines winning Bathurst grids. Pintaras filling family driveways. Bluebirds in every Kmart car park from Queanbeyan to Bunbury. On paper, Nissan Clayton is thriving, but 8,000 kilometres north, in Yokohama, the Nissan Motor Company Limited boardroom is running different numbers, and those numbers do not look good. Chapter 7. The Button Plan. 1985. Senator John Button, Minister for Industry in the Bob Hawke Labor government, announces the Motor Industry Development Plan. The Button Car Plan. Cut Australian-made car models from 13 to 6 across 3 manufacturing groups. Force scale. Force badge engineering deals. Tariffs from 57.5% in 1985, reducing 2.5 percentage points per year, from 1988, reaching 45% by 1992, 35% by 1995, 15% by 2000. 5 surviving manufacturers in 1985: Holden, Ford, Mitsubishi, Toyota, Nissan. The Button Plan forces badge share deals. General Motors and Toyota strike a Detroit-level deal. Holden Nova becomes a Toyota Corolla. Holden Apollo becomes a Toyota Camry. That leaves Nissan without a badge share partner. Nissan pairs with Ford. The Nissan Pintara becomes the Ford Corsair. Same car, different badge. Australian buyers reject the rebadged cars overwhelmingly. Toyotas outsell Novas and Apollos by roughly 7-1. Ford Corsair sales are dwarfed by the Mazda-based Ford Telstar. The badge engineering strategy fails commercially. Buyers can tell a rebadged car when they see one. The Button Plan is structural context, not the villain. It gives the Australian car industry a runway to consolidate as tariffs come down. Some manufacturers use the runway well, others don't. But at Clayton scale, 1 plant, 1 badge, 1 production runway, Nissan struggles to make the maths work. Nissan Australia posts a $36 million loss for the financial year ending March 1990. Then for the financial year ending March 1991, $125 million net loss, sales down 29% in a single year. The 1991 Australian recession, Treasurer Paul Keating's Recession We Had to Have, announced November 1990, has hit the discretionary car market hard. Meanwhile, production numbers collapse. From nearly 58,000 vehicles in 1990 to just under 36,000 in 1991. In 1 year, a drop of 38% in Yokohama, the Kume Tsuji handover is underway. President Yutaka Kume, born 20th of May 1921, engineer, 70 years old, is preparing to hand over to incoming President Yoshifumi Tsuji. And the boardroom is looking at the Australian numbers and asking one question. Does Clayton pay? Chapter 8. 4 February 1992. 4th of February 1992. Yokohama, Japan. Nissan Motor Company Limited Headquarters. The announcement goes to the wire services. Nissan Australia will close the Clayton plant. Terminate Australian Nissan manufacturing. Import complete cars from Japan from 1993 onwards. Retain the Nissan casting plant, established 1982 as a parts supplier. 1,800 workers from a 2,600-person workforce made redundant. In Melbourne, Nissan Motor Company of Australia Managing Director Leon Daphne speaks to Reuters. Wilson De Silva takes the quote, Daphne verbatim. As an importer, Nissan will continue to maintain a major market presence in Australia. Our target is to be the #1 importer and a leading exporter of Australian-made components. #1 importer, not the manufacturer. The pivot from making cars in Melbourne to selling Japanese-made cars in Melbourne. Ivan Devison. AO, the man who had been the face of Nissan Clayton for 4 years, was not at the announcement. He had left Nissan Australia in 1991, 10 months earlier, to become chairman of the Seven Network. He would go on to be Lord Mayor of Melbourne, 1996 to 1999. He was gone before the axe fell. Vehicle Builders Employees Federation. Victorian Secretary Ian Jones responds on behalf of the union. The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Australian ABC News cover the story. Historian Timothy Minchin of La Trobe University would later document the closure in his 2007 Labour History article, The Assembly Line and Cars Come First, putting the redundancy figure at around 2,000 workers. The Clayton workforce learns about the closure via the morning newspapers. Union meetings and severance negotiations follow through the year. And the questions begin. Which workers stay at NIAP? Which workers go? How much notice? What severance? Whether Nissan Australia's imported car business will absorb any of the assembly workforce. The answer to most of these questions is no. Here's the honest thing. The Tokyo boardroom that voted to close the plant had never walked the Centre Road factory floor. Kume never visited Clayton. Tsuji, incoming president, never visited Clayton. The decision was made 8,000 kilometres away by executives who had never met the 2,600 workers whose jobs were on the line. The Nissan Australia loss numbers arrived on their desks in Yokohama as a spreadsheet, $125 million, 29% sales decline, tariff schedule hitting 45% by 1992, and the maths did not work. Same corporate name, Nissan, whose founder Aikawa built the Manchurian Industrial Development Company for the Kwantung Army in 1937. Same corporate name, whose Datsun 17T trucks supplied the Imperial Japanese Army, fighting Australians, and Allied forces across the Pacific from 1942. Now, 50 years later, closing an Australian family car factory by wire service dispatch from Yokohama. Chapter 9. 20,231. 1992. The final production year at Clayton. 20,231 cars built, down from 36,000 in 1991, down from 58,000 in 1990. Every car built in 1992 was built by workers who knew they were being made redundant. The Vehicle Builders Employees Federation had already begun negotiating severance terms. The Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, the AMWU, into which VBF would merge in 1993, was managing the shutdown. The Pintara ends production in mid-1992. The R31 Skyline ends production. The N14 Pulsar, the model Nissan Australia, had invested $362 million in for the upgraded Clayton line. Becomes, per Curbside Classic magazine, the last Nissan built at Clayton. The exact month and day are not preserved in accessible records. Late 1992 is consensus, October or November, unverified in publicly available archives. Then silence. The workers walk out. 1,800 lose their jobs at the assembly plant. 800 continue at the Nissan casting plant, which had been established in 1982 and would survive as Australia's last automotive OEM parts manufacturer, still supplying die-cast components globally in 2026. Named workers from the closure period are difficult to source from accessible records. What is documented? Leon Daphne, Managing Director, on the record with Reuters for February. Ivan Devison, AO, former Managing Director, already at the Seven Network. Ian Jones, VBEF Victorian Secretary, responding for the Union. Historian Timothy Minchin of La Trobe University, whose research documents the closure and puts the total employment impact at around 2,000 people. Academic researchers Andrew Beer and Holly Thomas, whose 2007 Space and Polity article, The Politics and Policy of Economic Restructuring in Australia, studies the Hawke and Keating government responses to the closure. The exact final production day is not preserved. The individual last worker out is not identified in accessible records. The full detail sits in the print archives of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald for February and October to November 1992. Records that would need library microfilm access to fully recover. But 20,231 cars rolled off Centre Road, Clayton South in 1992, and then no more. Chapter 10. The First Domino, from October 1992 through October 2017. 25 years. The Australian automotive industry falls, one manufacturer at a time. Domino by domino, each closure confirming what the Nissan Clayton closure had first signalled, that Australian car manufacturing at scale was structurally over. Nissan, 1992, first domino, 1,800 Clayton workers redundant. Mitsubishi, 2008. Tonsley Park, Adelaide, the final locally developed Mitsubishi 380 rolls off the line. Approximately 900 jobs lost. The plant that had been Chrysler Australia's Hemi 6 factory in the 1970s, covered in Industrial South Ship 31, closes for good. Ford 2016. Broadmeadows, Melbourne, 7th of October 2016. 91 years of Ford Australia manufacturing ends. The world's last six-cylinder rear-wheel drive Ford Falcon XR6 is built. Around 600 jobs lost. Ford Australia CEO Graham Wickman verbatim. Today is an emotional day for the entire team of Ford Australia. We are saying goodbye to some wonderful manufacturing colleagues. Holden, 2017. Elizabeth, Adelaide, 20th of October 2017. 955 factory workers clock off for the last time. The last gleaming red Holden VF Commodore leaves the plant. Toyota, 2017. Altona, Melbourne. 3rd of October 2017. Approximately 2,600 jobs lost. 19-year Toyota worker Matthew Kinson was among those quoted in the closure coverage. Australian automotive manufacturing is over. Nissan Clayton in 1992 was the first sign the industry was structurally finished. 25 years later, the last Toyota clocked off at Altona. each closure announced years in advance. Ford, May 2013. Holden, December 2013. Toyota, February 2014. 2 decades of Australian automotive workers knowing their factories were on borrowed time. From Elizabeth in Adelaide's north, to Broadmeadows in Melbourne's north, to Altona in Melbourne's west, to Tonsley Park in Adelaide's south, to Clayton in Melbourne's southeast, every major Australian car manufacturing city lost its assembly line industry. 1,800 Clayton workers gone, 900 Mitsubishi Adelaide. 600 Ford Broadmeadows, 955 Holden Elizabeth. 2,600 Toyota Altona. Around 7,000 direct assembly jobs across the 5 closures, plus thousands more across the local supplier chain that had grown up around each plant. Nissan Clayton was the first. It set the pattern. And within a generation, every other Australian car manufacturer followed. And the Clayton site itself? The building sat as commercial warehousing through the 1990s, the 2000s, and most of the 2010s. Owned by Goodman Group. Rebranded as the Clayton Business Park. 145,000 square metres of built space across 21 buildings, rented to logistics companies and light industry tenants. Until October 2025, when the Bulldozers arrived. Chapter 11. The Data Centre. 2026. Walk to Centre Road, Clayton South. 9 kilometres southeast of Melbourne Central Business District at 1508 Centre Road and adjacent to Nursery Avenue, the site of the former Volkswagen Nissan Volvo factory. Where Volkswagen Beetles, Datsun 120Ys, Datsun 200Bs, Nissan Bluebirds, Nissan Skylines, Nissan Pintaras, Nissan Pulsars and Volvos rolled off the line for 41 years. Nothing. The Clayton Business Park buildings, demolished in October 2025. In their place, construction of a state-of-the-art data centre, server racks, cooling towers, fibre optic infrastructure. The last of the factory buildings filmed being levelled by Bosch engineer Paul Gekas from his office at 1555 Centre Road. Same fate as the neighbouring former Holden Special Vehicles headquarters. Same fate as much of Australian automotive manufacturing heritage. Because the economy that once needed factories to make things now needs data centres to serve algorithms. Meanwhile, the Nissan Castling plant, NCAP, still runs. Established 1982. Australia's last automotive OEM parts manufacturer. Roughly 800 workers still on Centre Road, making die-cast components for Nissan vehicles built elsewhere in the world, Japan, Thailand, Mexico. Australian workers still contributing to Nissan's global supply chain, just not building whole cars. Driving out of Clayton, north into Springvale, west through Oakleys, south to Dandenong, east to Mount Waverley, you will find surviving Clayton-built cars. Cream, 1976. Datsun 120Y sedan still parked in Springvale driveways. Copper, 1979. Datsun 200B GX wagons at Sunday morning car shows. Silver 1984 Nissan Bluebird TRX at Grey Nomad convoys. 1988 Nissan Pintaras at outer suburban Toyota Hilux tow bars. Restored R31 Skylines at cars and coffee events. Made in Australia between 1977 and 1992. Still rolling. Meanwhile, Yokohama, Japan. To Takaracho, Kanagawa-ku. Nissan Motor Company, Limited Global Headquarters, still stands. The Kume Tsuji handover that closed Clayton in 1992 is now several presidencies ago. Nissan has had multiple global crises since, including the Carlos Ghosn arrest in 2018. Different boardrooms, different presidents, same corporate lineage. And Nissan is, per Leon Daphne's 4 February 1992 pivot announcement, still one of Australia's top-selling Japanese import brands. The Nissan Patrol, the Nissan Navara, the Nissan Qashqai, imported, not made here. The Centre Road factory that made the family car is gone. The Yokohama headquarters that closed it is thriving. Same company, different relationship to Australia. Yokohama still exists. Centre Road does not. And in 2026, driving along Centre Road past the demolition fencing, past the temporary construction hoardings, past the Bosch office at 1555, where Paul Gekas filmed The Bulldozers, you would not know a car factory once stood there. There is no plaque, there is no memorial, there is no sign that says Australian family cars were made here for 41 years. Just the smooth grey concrete of a data centre foundation. Just the humming servers that will replace the humming production line. Lesson 1. Tokyo boardrooms don't see Melbourne workers. Industrial South has told 37 stories of Australian factories that fell. Some to founder decisions. Halverson's fiberglass revolution, Franklin's Robertson exit at the peak. Some to corporate fraud, Cleanmaid's young family, Sunbeam's chainsaw Al Dunlap. Some to structural policy, Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation's 60 years of Australian government procurement retreats. Nissan Clayton is different. Because Nissan Clayton was closed by a Tokyo boardroom decision made 8,000 kilometres from the Centre Road factory floor. President Yutaka Kume did not visit Clayton before the 4 February 1992 announcement. Incoming President Yoshifumi Tsuji did not visit Clayton before or after. Nissan Australia's Melbourne Managing Director Leon Daphne delivered the news to Reuters in a Melbourne office, because the actual decision had been made in Yokohama. The 2,600 Australian workers learned about the closure via the morning papers. Read that again. The people who decided to close the plant that employed 2,600 Melbourne families had never walked the Centre Road factory floor. When foreign-owned Australian manufacturing operations are closed by parent company boardrooms in Tokyo, Detroit, Highland Park, Sandy Springs, Wichita or Seattle, the decisions are made at a distance. The workers are not people. The workers are a line item in a corporate restructuring plan. Chrysler Australia, closed by Highland Park Chrysler and later Mitsubishi Tokyo. Sunbeam Australia, gutted by Chainsaw Al Dunlap in Delray Beach, Florida, Esky. Sold to Coleman in Wichita, Kansas, subsidiary of Newell Brands in Sandy Springs, Georgia. Cleanmaid Baronia, gutted by the Young family, Australian, but at boardroom distance from the shop floor. The pattern is clear. When an Australian manufacturing operation is owned by a foreign or distant corporate parent, the parent's boardroom sees the operation as a spreadsheet line item, not a workforce, not a community, not a factory town. Nissan Clayton was the first major Australian car manufacturer to fall this way. 25 years later, Mitsubishi, Ford, Holden and Toyota all followed. Every one of them closed by a foreign parent company boardroom that did not see the Australian workers. Distance is not neutrality. Distance is a decision. Lesson 2. The same company can build you and bury you. Yoshisuke Aikawa founded the Nissan Zaibatsu in 1928, founded Nissan Motor Company in 1933, moved Nissan's headquarters to occupied Manchuria in 1937 as chairman of the Manchurian Industrial Development Company. Executed the Kwantung Army's industrial plans through 1942. Nissan trucks, the Datsun 17T from 1938 through 1944, supplied the Imperial Japanese Army throughout the Pacific War against Australian and Allied forces. From January 1942 through August 1945. Aikawa was arrested by United States occupation authorities as a Class A war crime suspect in 1945, later released without charge, elected to the Japanese House of Councillors in 1953. Died the 13th of February 1967. Same company, different war. 47 years after the Pacific War ended, the same corporate name, Nissan, closed the Clayton factory in Melbourne that had built Australian family cars for 15 years. To be clear, the Nissan of 1992 was not the Nissan of 1942. The presidents were different. The corporate structure was different. The corporate culture was different. Post-war reformed, Deming trained, Toyota influenced, globally competitive. Kume and Tsuji were not Aikawa. The Zaibatsu had been dissolved by the American occupation in 1945. But the corporate lineage was continuous. The name was the same. And Australian workers who lost their jobs in 1992 lost them to a company whose founder had, half a century earlier, supplied the military that fought their fathers and grandfathers in the Pacific. That is not a nationalist attack on Japan. That is corporate genealogy. When a foreign multinational buys, builds, or takes over an Australian factory, the corporate history comes with it. The lineage does not evaporate at the acquisition papers. It sits in the corporate identity, in the brand, in the boardroom's institutional memory. The same company that built you can bury you. 50 years later, in a different war, Nissan built the Australian family car at Clayton for 15 years. Then Nissan closed it. Same badge, different boardroom generation, same corporate name. Lesson 3. The factory becomes a data centre. October 2025. Centre Road, Clayton South. Bulldozers arrive. The Volkswagen assembly plant of 1954. The Datsun 200B factory of 1977. The Nissan Bluebird plant of 1981. The R31 Skyline production line of 1986. Australia's family car factory for 41 years. Demolished. In its place, server farms. Fibre optic infrastructure. Cooling towers. Racks of computers processing algorithms for cloud tenants half a world away. The economy that once needed factories to make things now needs data centres to serve services. This is not a critique. This is a description. When the manufacturing base of a country transitions to a service and data economy, the factories don't get repurposed as museums or memorials. They get flattened and replaced by whatever the next economy needs. Clayton 2025 is not an isolated case. The former Holden Special Vehicles headquarters, adjacent to the Clayton plant, was demolished the same year for the same reason. Australian automotive heritage, cleared for data infrastructure. And the workers who built the cars, some retired, some retrained, some drove trucks, some are still driving 1979 Datsun 200Bs around outer suburban Melbourne. The workforce that assembled 20,231 Clayton cars in 1992 dispersed across the Melbourne labour market. Some found new manufacturing jobs at other automotive suppliers. Some went to Toyota Altona. Some went to Ford Broadmeadows. Then those closed too. 2017, 2016, 2017. The badge survives. Restored Clayton-built Datsuns and Nissans still roll on Australian roads. Cream 120Ys in Springvale. Silver Bluebird, TRXs at Grey Nomad convoys. R31 Skylines at Sunday morning cars and coffee events. In dozens, possibly hundreds of surviving examples on Australian roads. But the factory is gone. Not repurposed. Not memorialised. Demolished. When an industrial empire falls, the badge survives on the artefacts. The factory becomes a data centre. 20,231 cars. Clayton, 1992. Yokohama remembers. Centre Road does not.